Okay, starting chapter 14, this is page 313 in your textbook. We're looking at Bedřich Smetana. I do have trouble saying his first name, so that's not quite correct, but his last name is Smetana. So Smetana lived from 1824, died in 1884, and he basically founded Czech nationalist music, the first one to really bring nationalist music into the spotlight. He uses folk music and legends from his native country, which was at the time Bohemia. It's basically what the Czech Republic is today. The borders were a little bit different, but it was called Bohemia. He grew up in Bohemia while it was still under Austrian rule. However, because of wars and things, Austria still ruled Bohemia, but their power was lessened. And so as that happened, Czech nationalism, particularly music nationalism, started to spread. Oops. So this is where the Czech Republic is in Europe. Here's Prague, the main city, and that's where Smetana was, in Prague. As you can see, it's still next door to Austria. Okay, so looking at the career of Smetana, he was a composer, a pianist, conductor, and teacher. So he had lots of different jobs, which was pretty common for a romantic composer or musician. His most popular opera was The Bartered Bride, and one of his most popular orchestral works is Ma Vlast, or My Country. It's actually a cycle or a collection of 6 symphonic poems about the Bohemian history and Czech landscape. Some of them are trying to evoke different parts of the landscape, like rivers or mountains, and some of them are dealing more with history. Now, this next part is a little tough, but also important to talk about. Later in his life, about age 50, he started to go deaf, but he was still able to compose some of his most popular works. So a lot of the times we think of Beethoven being the only composer who went deaf. That's not true. Several composers went deaf later in their lives, but Beethoven was the one who went deaf very early in his life. The reason he went deaf is likely because he had syphilis, which in its later stages can impact your overall health and mental health, because it can infect the brain. So during the last decade of his life, we know that he was in intense mental and physical pain, and regardless of that, he was still able to write some of his most popular works, his best-known works. He even completed Ma Vlast during that time period. Also, strange and sad but true, a lot of composers in the Romantic period had the same disease. Schubert did as well. So looking at one of Smetana's works, this is the Moldau. You have information about this on page 314. He wrote this in 1874. It's from Ma Vlast, and it has a program that goes with it so that you, the audience, know what's going on. The program reads, "The composition depicts the course of the river, beginning from its 2 small sources, one cold, the other warm, the joining of both streams into one, and then the flow of the Moldau through forest, across meadows, through the countryside where merry feasts are celebrated. Water nymphs dance in the moonlight. On nearby rocks can be seen the outline of ruined castles, proudly soaring into the sky. The Moldau swirls through the St. John Rapids and flows in a broad stream toward Prague. It passes Vyšehrad, where an ancient royal castle once stood. And finally, the river disappears in the distance as it flows majestically into the Elbe." So, it's very peaceful, very tranquil, and it's kind of like if you were to take one of those Viking river cruises around Europe, but you're getting it through music, a symphonic poem. And so you have this listening available for you in the playlist, and this is found on page 314 in your textbook. Okay, chapter 15, looking at another Czech composer, Antonín Dvorak. He lived from 1841 and died in 1904. He actually kind of carried on Smetana's legacy as the leading Czech nationalist composer. So after Smetana died, Dvorak was able to carry on that banner, or carry on that role. Background, he was actually from a very humble beginnings, kind of middle class. His father was a poor innkeeper and butcher near Prague, but he was kind of the country boy. But at age 16, he left home to go to Prague to study music. There he worked as part of the orchestra. He was an instrumentalist in the orchestra, and Smetana conducted that orchestra. for better or worse, Dvorak's music was not super well known until the intervention of Brahms, another composer. We talked about Brahms when talking about the Schumanns, Robert and Clara Schumann. This is their friend Brahms. Brahms actually discovered one of Dvorak's works and actually helped Dvorak get his music to a publisher. Brahms actually suggested one of his own publishers. So that's one, kind of Brahms, but two, shows you how much in esteem Dvorak's music was. Like, Brahms really just appreciated what Dvorak brought to the table. So looking at his travels here, he traveled all over the world kind of after that initial meeting with Brahms and help from Brahms. So at age 36, he became internationally recognized, and he traveled to England a good bit. The English people really appreciated the folk quality that Dvorak would put into his music. So even though it was a different folk music, the Slavic folk music, the English people still really appreciated that because English music was heavily folk influenced as well. In 1892, he leaves the continent and he goes to New York in America, and he spent 3 years directing the National Conservatory of Music. While he's in America, he does something that's actually quite important. He encouraged Americans to write down nationalist music. So in American history, music history, a lot of Americans wanted to imitate what was happening in Europe, and Dvorak said, no, you don't need to do that. You have plenty of great material here. And he was referencing Native American melodies and African American spirituals. He said, you can't find this anywhere else in the world. Why are you kind of neglecting it? You should be writing it down. And so, because of Dvorak, there are actually records of Native American melodies and African American spirituals from the late 1800s that honestly may not have survived into the 1900s without his influence. We are going to look at one of his works. This is called the New World Symphony. This is his 9th symphony. He wrote it during his first year in America, and he tries to blend American folk music and Czech folk music, just because obviously he's Czech, he's interested in his own musical heritage, but he's fascinated by this new musical heritage as well. In this symphony, there's a good bit of a pentatonic scale, which is a modal scale often found in folk music, and it has 5 notes. So a pentatonic scale may sound like da 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 da, and that's the scale. It just has 5 notes, and if you're thinking of the Pentatonics, the vocal group, yes, their name is a play on words for the pentatonic scale, because again, 5 people. But the pentatonic scale, again, is a common modal kind of scale for a lot of folk music. It doesn't matter where in the world, we usually find a pentatonic scale involved somehow, some way. And so Dvorak really picks up on that and includes it in this New World Symphony. You are going to listen to Movement 1, and there is a listening guide on page 317 in your textbook. And the video is in the playlist. All right, last chapter for today, looking at, finally, Johannes Brahms. This is page 319. He lived from 1833 and died in 1897, and he's from Hamburg, Germany. So he was also one of those precocious music students. At age 13, he was already studying theory, composition, and piano, and then at night, after doing his homework, he would go ahead and play dance music for local cafes. So this guy did not stop. He just went, boom, I'm a musician. At age 20, as he's getting his career started, he met the Schumanns, Clara and Robert Schumann. Robert Schumann, who again was a music critic, he had this music journal that was well received, actually praised Brahms' music in that music journal. And so that's kind of how Brahms became really famous. And it started his friendship with the Schumanns. Now, the friendship with the Schumanns can get a little complicated because Brahms basically had a huge crush on Clara Schumann. Rough story about how they're connected. So we know that Robert Schumann in his later years started to have a lot of physical and mental health issues. He was sent to an asylum because his wife couldn't take care of him anymore. He was very much in need of professional assistance. So Brahms decided to help Clara raise their 7 kids, the Schumann children. So he moved into the Schumann household for 2 years and actually helped take care of the kids while she was on concert tours trying to basically feed her family. So that's very sweet of him. Clara was 14 years older than him. We don't know how their relationship really worked, if they ever dated or anything. They burned a lot of their letters, their correspondence, so we don't know exactly what happened. But we do know that they never married. They never married each other, and they were friends for basically forever. Brahms actually stayed a bachelor his entire life. We do know that when she finally passed away, he wrote all night in a storm just to be there for the funeral and was just heartbroken, of course. So the relationship with Brahms and the Schumanns, although shrouded with a lot of mystery, at the same time it's like, oh man, you want to know. But anywho, it's very clear that Brahms and the Schumanns were quite close. So looking at his career here, I don't know why there's a box around that. Oh well. Anyway, he worked in Vienna as a conductor and composer, so he really just stuck to 2 jobs, and that seemed to tide him over. He didn't need any more money. His specialty was that he liked old music, which was kind of crazy for the 1800s. People didn't listen to stuff that was more than like a few years old. But he is trying to reintroduce music by Bach, Handel, and Mozart, the greats that people had forgotten about. He had a thorough knowledge of older music simply because he liked to study that older music and edit some of it for publication. And because he is always studying this old music, he winds up being critical of his own work. He holds himself to a high standard. He says, if I'm not as good as Bach, what's the point? Maybe I shouldn't publish this. Maybe I should keep reworking it. Kind of a sore point in Brahms's mind, he was often contrasted with another German composer, Wagner. They were contemporaries, and so we'll talk about Wagner later in the unit, but Wagner liked heavy, lush, programmatic, operatic music, and Brahms was the exact opposite. He didn't even like to write opera. In fact, he never wrote opera. So they're very much at 2 ends of the spectrum. Very much opposites. As a person, he was pretty shy, but also super snarky and sarcastic, so I feel like we would get along. After Clara Schumann died, he wrote 4 serious songs in dedication to her, and he died of cancer at age 64. So looking at his music, again, he wrote in all forms except for opera. He had a deeply personal style, still romantic, but he is so invested in classical forms of Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven that he, kind of like Mendelssohn, blends what is romantic and classical together. He kind of, and I guess a better way would be to say he reinterprets those classical forms. His music could be described as lyrical, very rhythmic. There's going to be a lot of syncopation, so stressing what is off of the beat. As an example of some of his music, we're going to listen to 2 pieces. The first comes from Symphony No. 3, Opus 90. You have this on page 322, the listening guide, and this is also in the playlist. When he was writing this, he played like 2 movements of this on the piano to a young Dvorak, and Dvorak was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So even right out of the gate, it was already impressing a lot of people. This is the shortest of all of his symphonies, and is connected by thematic material, so you're going to hear the same themes throughout the symphony. We're not going to listen to the entire symphony, you're just going to listen to movement 3. And again, this is in the playlist and in your textbook. One of his other famous works would be the Ein Deutsches Requiem, or a German Requiem, written in 1868. This is choral. It's written for a choir with an orchestra and a baritone and soprano soloists. So kind of a traditional setup for a requiem. And remember, a requiem is a set of text that is presented at the funeral mass of someone in the Catholic Church. This is the Protestant response to that, but more than just being Protestant or specifically Lutheran, it's supposed to represent German. This is a German mass. So it not only took religious meaning, it also took some political meaning as well. You are going to listen to movement 4, How Lovely is Thy Dwelling Place. This is a German requiem, and it is commonly performed in both German and English, so I provided for you the English version. You can find this listening guide on page 325, and this is, again, in the listening playlist. And that's it.